Writing Out Loud, a program designed to explore in-depth interviews with writers to hear that words have voices. Our hostess for today's program is Teresa Miller, Executive Director for the Oklahoma Center for Poets and Writers at OSU Tulsa.
Hello, everyone. I'm Teresa Miller, and welcome to Writing Out Loud. My very special guest today is the legendary journalist Roger Mudd. I can't believe I'm sitting across from you.
Where did you get this word legendary?
Well, wasn't that in the bio you sent me?
Well, I hope not. I wouldn't dare use that word.
I know you're a very modest man. Everyone says so, but you are legendary. Just think of the stories you've covered in your career and the span of your career and the news that you've given us over the years. I mean, some of the biggest stories in history I heard from you, and so that creates this bond between us. And I look at you and I think, oh my goodness, you're a part of our history.
Well, the stories are legendary, but I'm not. I mean, I was just there, standing on the curb, watching the parade go by.
That's a good analogy.
Well, there's always a temptation when you're a journalist to join the parade, and you're not supposed to.
Yeah.
And most of us don't. A few can't resist the temptation, and they jump down off the curb, and instead of being observers of what's passing by, they become participants. And that leads to a general disenchantment with the media and their role and its role in society.
Boy, we're going through that disenchantment now, aren't we?
Well, the media is an easy target. We don't have a built-in constituency like a congressman does or a senator does. And when we are attacked, there are not many people who come to our defense. But that you expect that because you're trying to call the shots evenly, and when you do that, you're going to offend one side or the other, and they'll accuse you of favoring the other side. It's happening now in the midst of this campaign.
Oh yeah, and we're in the midst of the 2008 presidential election, and you've written a wonderful new memoir, The Place to Be. And you've been at several great places, I mean several great networks. Why did you decide to focus on your years at CBS?
I had written sort of a helter-skelter memoir, just started to fool around with it to see where it would go, and sent off about 50 pages to the editor of Public Affairs. And he said, I don't want to publish this. It's your bitterness about your network experience comes through. Everybody knows the story of what's happened to the networks. You can do the same thing by indirection, by writing about when television news was really, really good. Why don't you, he said, why don't you write about that great Washington bureau at CBS of which you were a part? And so just overnight, the memoir changed, and I did a 180-degree turn, and I confined it to those 20 years, 1960 to 1980. And those were the glory years for not only for our Washington bureau at CBS, but for television news in general. Those 20 years had stories that really were unequaled of any 20-year period I know anything about. Maybe right after the Civil War or World War II, but in my lifetime, my mature lifetime, those 20 years were unequaled for the stories and the changes that they brought to the United States, to American society, Vietnam, space, Watergate, impeachment, assassinations, resignations, Nixon, Agnew. It's an unbelievable run of stories.
Incredible. And you mentioned early on in the book that the 1959 tour of Khrushchev was a turning point for you, that you began to view yourself a little differently as a journalist after that. And I wonder if you might speak to that.
Well, I was a local reporter on a local radio television station, and never quite knew that I had it, that I could do it, that I could play with the big boys. And so the station assigned me to go on the Khrushchev trip. And I found after it was over that the copy that I wrote, I was out on my own, stood up quite well against anything the New York Times was writing. And I had, after a week, 10 days on the road with Khrushchev, I found that I had, in fact, been able, by myself, to capture the feeling on that trip. I was able to portray Khrushchev as not boorish peasant, as most people thought he was. And I thought I was able to capture the color and the difficulties and the humor and the excitement of that trip. And at that point, I thought, okay, I want to be a journalist now. I mean, I was ambivalent about it before, but this, I think, convinced me.
You've interviewed so many great heads of state, and you got a chance to meet John F. Kennedy and interview him just once. That you actually spent time talking with John F. Kennedy.
Not really, Teresa.
Sort of a glancing.
Well, it was. We had flown to Texas. He wanted to pay last respects to the dying Speaker Sam Rayburn, and I was late finishing dictating my story at the airport in Dallas, and the rear steps of the Air Force One had come up, which meant that's the rear steps was what the press used. Only the front steps were still available, and I came running out on the tarmac, and somebody in the plane yelled, "Wait for the kid!" That was I'm the kid, and they held the steps, and up the steps I came, and there is the President of the United States standing there, and he goes, "That's it." It's like that. And as I sort of walked by, excuse me, there I looked over, and there in the closet where usually you hang your jackets and stuff, yeah, there were shelves, built-in shelves, and each shelf was filled with freshly laundered shirts. John Kennedy's shirts.
He needed that many shirts.
And it turns out later that every time he got off Air Force One, he put on a fresh shirt. Partially for male vanity, but also he was wearing at the time a metal brace for his back. And apparently he sweated a lot because of that brace. So there were these fresh shirts. I never used that in the story, but it wound up in the book because I remembered it.
Well, there was so much about Kennedy that didn't wind up in the press. Yeah. And you mentioned going to the Palm Beach weekend, and there were some pretty girls coming in and on and off yachts and so forth. But no one thought about writing about that sort of thing in that time.
Well, that's right, because back then we thought we were serious journalists. We didn't think we were gossip columnists. And besides, you couldn't quite prove who those women were. You had your binoculars up, you were out on the boat looking, and every time a long-legged young woman would get off and get onto the presidential yacht, here would come the Secret Service boat blocking your view. So, and of course, Pierre Salinger wasn't going to say, yeah, just another girlfriend. He wasn't about to get into that story. So it was difficult to nail the story down, and as a consequence, a lot went on that we didn't report, simply because back then, this is 1962 and 3, the zone of privacy was still pretty big for a president. A lot of that has changed.
For the better or worse?
Well, Teresa, I've always believed that the zone of privacy gets smaller and smaller as a politician gets more and more power and has more control over your life. You want to know virtually everything there is to know about him. And so as a consequence, I think under the circumstances of this government and the power that the president has, I think in exchange for the power, you give up your privacy, most of it. There's certain things that remain private and should remain private. But when you're president, I don't think there's much that you can claim to be private.
You were at CBS when Walter Cronkite made the announcement that Kennedy had been assassinated. What was it like for the news media during that time covering a story that turned out to be the big story, one of the big stories of the 20th century?
Well, it was, none of us had ever been through a presidential assassination before. And so every emotion and every reaction and every action was the first for all of us. It became, what happens in an emotional situation like that is that the emotion gets drained out of it. Because what you're doing, it becomes almost mechanical, moving crews. You go here, I'll go here. You got 5 minutes to do this, shifting assignments, and so so you keep your emotions in check, and that's after it's all over. Then you collapse inside.
Yeah, I bet so, and I bet some of the images that you saw will forever stay with you. And as I think about those times, Roger, you didn't have cell phones. I mean, you didn't have a lot of the modern technology. You didn't have computers.
Or Blackberries.
Or Blackberries or any of that fancy stuff. As you look back now in retrospect, how good a job did the media do of covering that story?
Oh, I thought that the cooperation between and among the networks was outstanding. It was in fact a moment of a national crisis to lose a president that way, and so the normal competitive edge that the networks tried to maintain softened a great deal. So we pooled cameras, we pooled reporters, and in the end, I think we served the nation well. I think we covered it with dignity, and we covered the story, and as we learned things, we reported them. We did not hold them back, but I think for me, the lasting image is when the president's body was brought to Capitol Hill, and he was lying in state, and they opened those great bronze doors in the Capitol, and the line that had been waiting to get in stretched about 5 miles from the Capitol all the way down to New Jersey Avenue to the Anacostia River and back again. They had hoped to close the doors at midnight. They stayed open until 3 in the morning.
Mentioned Walter Cronkite. What gave him such presence behind the anchor desk?
Well, he just believed in the news. He believed that the news was the news, and you don't trifle with it. And he thought reporters ought to report, and he thought things that went on in Washington were important, and he allowed us to do the reporting, and that helped very much turn the Washington Bureau into a major source of reliability. And so when you called and said, you say Mud CBS or Calb CBS, they answered your call because they knew you were serious, and they knew when they talked to you that you'd be on the air that night because Cronkite wanted you on the air because he believed that you should be the reporter.
And you worked with so many good journalists back then. I was wondering if you could give us some insights into some of them. Eric Severide.
Aloof, was doing the only work. Nobody was doing the kind of thing he did on television, which was a nightly analysis, 2 minutes every night, or 4 nights out of 5. Had a few friends in the Bureau, but we all respected him, and our Bureau would not have been the same without him. Dan Shore, who came in from abroad, came in and covered the Great Society, and then Watergate, tenacious, had a huge appetite to be on the air. Marvin Kalb, steeped in diplomacy, a student of Russian studies, looked almost like a ambassador himself. Dan Rather at the White House, aggressive, drove the Nixon people nuts. Bob Pierpoint, always reliable and steady. George Herman, he was our Encyclopedia Britannica, ran Face the Nation. And Bob Schieffer from Texas had come up from Dallas and within a year was covering the Pentagon. That was the front row. In the back row was Ed Bradley and Leslie Stahl and Bruce Morton and Phil Jones and on and on and on. Connie Chung, Mariah McLaughlin. And the back row at CBS would have been the front row at any other bureau.
Well, you mentioned Leslie Stahl and Connie Chung. Yeah. Were they viewed the same way as the male journalists back then?
Probably not. Leslie got crossed swords with the desk a lot because she felt she was being used as a woman. And the editor, Bill Galbraith, said, Leslie was mad at me because I made her stand out in the rain and ruined her hairdo. Well, come on, Bill.
Yeah, come on.
But she was, for all her griping about being the stakeout queen during the Watergate, the publicity and the recognition that she got for being the stakeout queen was the basis of her acceptance as a good reporter, because she was. She was very hardworking, and she's now, mainstay at 60 Minutes and has been for a long time.
Oh, yeah, and does great work. One of your main contributions as a journalist, Roger, and I'm going to use this word legendary again, but your coverage of civil rights. Take us back to the beginning in that Senate filibuster over the Civil Rights Act.
Well, there had been, I don't know how many, at least a dozen attempts to break a civil rights filibuster. It had never happened. Never been able to break a civil rights filibuster. So after the assassination, the Kennedy assassination of '63, there had been a civil rights bill sort of floating around, and Johnson, now the president, decided this was the time to make the big push to get the civil rights bill through, using the name of the fallen president. And so here it came, and the Southern senators got geared for it and going to resist it again. Fred Friendly, then the president of CBS, said, I want you, Mudd, to cover the civil rights debate, and I want you on every television broadcast, and I want you on every other radio broadcast. And I thought that it was kind of a flagpole sitting stunt, and he said, no, this is serious. So I agreed, and so for the next 12 weeks, that's all I did. And I did a morning television, a noon television, a 3:30 television, a 6:30 television, and an 11 o'clock television, and every other radio hourly. And it, I must say, I learned in that 12-week period more about the Senate and who was good and who was dumb and who was industrious, and it was a period of really education for me. And I think, in the end, I think and I played it straight. I didn't slant the news. If we had Humphrey one night, we had Richard Russell the next night. So it was a very evenly reported, and I think in the end it helped a great deal for the people to understand the necessity for the bill. And they broke the filibuster for the first time, 1964.
Incredible story.
Yeah.
You've gotten numerous awards for your work, including a Peabody for your in-depth interview with Edward Kennedy, Teddy. Mm-hmm. I've been watching the footage of that again. I ordered it because I was just fascinated by it. What was it like for you sitting across from Kennedy? I mean, suddenly this isn't the kind of interview that a lot of people had expected.
Well, he had, until that time, this was, what's the date of that, 1979?
Yes.
1979. Until then, he had, his appearances on television were limited to Meet the Press, Face the Nation, so selected moments but this was the first time he had sat down and done an extended interview. And I was really well prepared for it, and he knew it. And so interviewing a Kennedy has never been easy. They want to know ahead of time, not necessarily what the questions are, but they want to know what the effect, the political effect will be. So they're very hesitant about speaking fully and frankly. And so it was a very difficult interview, and he wasn't giving very much at all. And we were very worried that we were not going to have a good program. I was frustrated because I was trying to just get something out of him, and I was trying to find out how he differed from President Carter. It's a big thing for a sitting Democratic senator to try to unhorse a sitting Democratic president. So how do you differ? And I couldn't find out what the differences were, and in the frustration I said, well, I mean, so why do you want to be president? And the answer was so, well, it wasn't incoherent, but it was virtually incoherent. And people could not believe that he didn't have a grip on why he wanted to be president. It was not a helpful interview for him. I don't think it ruined his candidacy, but I must say it's not the way you wanted to begin one.
Well, and the Kennedys weren't too eager to have you interview them after that. Is that correct?
Well, there wasn't an occasion. I mean, I'd gone through Robert Kennedy's campaign and assassination, and Teddy was the only one left. So I mean, no, I was not invited back
to do Teddy Part 2.
Yeah, right, Part 2. Right.
You talked about the big stories, other big stories of the era, the Watergate and the Vietnam War. When you cover stories that are bigger than life, how do you begin to get a handle on them?
Well, you just do a day by day. You just work at it day by day. Sometimes, particularly when you're on Capitol Hill, it's very hard to see the big picture. Because when you work on Capitol Hill, you're so isolated from the rest of the country, and the rules of the Senate and the House are such that you're not aware of much of public opinion, and there comes a time when you find yourself concentrating more on what the effect of the legislation will be, and more on whether the legislation will get out of a subcommittee. Little dinky little questions like that. And so and I was very surprised, very, very surprised when during the Civil Rights Bill, when it obviously was having a major, major impact in the country, and the response was enormous throughout the country. But working day after day on the bill itself, you sink in the trivia of the legislation. So that's always a hard assignment, to make sure you got the big picture.
So many journalists are haunted by the big interviews that got away, even in spite of all the great ones that they got. Are you haunted by any of those? Are there any interviews you think, oh, I almost got that one?
You mean people I wish I had interviewed? Dead or alive?
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, let's open it up wide. We'll see. We just want to cast a big net here.
Yeah. I would love to have interviewed Robert E. Lee.
Oh, and that would have been fascinating. You'd had some good questions.
Yeah.
How about people who are alive right now? Who would you like to interview most?
Probably Sarah Palin.
What question? What would be the first question you ask her? Why do you want to be vice president? Yeah. I mean, I need to think about that. I think probably the first question would be, tell me why you think you're qualified. I'm sure I would be. She'd spin me. No, that would be an interesting interview. I don't think it would be a lot of fun, however, because if I may say so, I think she's out of her league, and the temptation would be to grind in on her. And I think the best way to approach an interview like that would be to give her the respect that any vice presidential candidate is due, and not to disrespect her. And I think the interview would probably be more revealing if you treated Governor Palin with respect rather than contempt. Isn't that true of most interviews, Roger, do you think?
Yes, but in this case, because her interviews to date have been so disastrous that there is this growing temptation to join the crowd.
I want to shift gears just a moment. We know you're a lover of politics, lover of history. You're also a lover of literature. Tell us about your special relationship with Eudora Welty.
I'm just trying to remember. I think Jim Lehrer introduced us. She was a big fan of the NewsHour with Robin McNeil and Jim, and she was in Washington, and Jim and Kate Lehrer had a dinner party for her, and my wife and I went. I was then working at NBC, but soon after I had joined Jim and Robin on PBS. So that was the friendship, and I did a couple interviews with her for NBC and also for the NewsHour, And the friendship developed, and when she'd come to Washington, she'd stay with us at the house. And if you ever get a thank you note from Eudora Welty, it's like a little short story.
No kidding.
It's like she'll tell you about the linen curtains and how many times they've been laundered so they're very soft and the light comes through the curtains. And she'll remember walking down our path to eat persimmons that have fallen on the ground. So all those things get into this thank you note. One weekend, my wife and I were visiting in Jackson, and I was part of the story I was doing. She had us out to dinner with one of her friends, Charlotte, and she was in the kitchen doing a crab casserole for the four of us, and we were having bourbon, this
yes,
little
I
cocktail.
heard she liked her bourbon.
Yeah, a little cocktail, and we heard this crash in the kitchen, and Charlotte, the friend, says, "There goes dinner." And so I went out to the kitchen, and Eudora had dropped the casserole on the floor. So I helped her clean it up. And so for dinner that night, we had another round of bourbon, a plate of sun-dried tomatoes, and rye crisps. And a lot of laughing.
Roger, we have 30 seconds left. Yeah. What did you learn about yourself from writing The Place to Be as you went back and reviewed those years?
Hardest thing to do is to be honest with yourself. And I tried my best. I was not easy to get along with as a reporter. I thought I was intolerant of others' mistakes, and I think I should have been a lot softer. I thought going back, I thought I could have maintained my high standards without being so intolerant of others. But these 50 men and women who came through this bureau, they helped me so much with this book.
Well, it's a great book, and congratulations on it and all the wonderful accomplishments in your career. And thank all of you for joining us on Writing Out Loud.